You really have to hear what this team encountered. If you stay with me, you will understand why one stretch of Mississippi timber still makes grown men turn their trucks around before dark. On August 18th, 2016, in Homochitto National Forest near Clear Springs Recreation Area, 3 people from our 4-person field crew were lost in less than 30 hours. 2 were recovered. 1 was never found. The county told the papers it was exposure, disorientation, and animal activity. That was false. The first body showed acute cardiac failure without blockage, poison, or trauma enough to stop a healthy heart. Her boots were lined beside a stump as if she had taken them off for bed. What comes next is the account. My name is Aaron Willis. I was 39 that summer, and I had spent 14 years doing field documentation for tribal cultural sites, environmental surveys, and old burial corridor reviews across Mississippi and Louisiana. My grandmother grew up west of McCall Creek. I learned those roads before I learned interstate exits. Nothing had ever frightened me. That changed at Homochitto National Forest. I knew how to sleep in wet clothes, how to read weather by smell, how to keep moving after a copperhead passed under my cot. I had walked cutovers, creek bottoms, and storm-damaged timber after midnight without my pulse changing. After August of 2016, I have not slept beside an open window once. The others were Claire Bennett, 42, a United States Forest Service law enforcement officer with 17 years in the field and a habit of checking every latch twice. Jonah Reed, 26, and a contract wildlife biologist with 2 field seasons behind him, eager, always kneeling to study sign. And Elena Ruiz, 34, an audio documentarian with 11 years of location work, the sort of person who could stay quiet long enough to hear a moth strike canvas. Claire was the senior authority among us, the one everyone listened to when maps and tempers disagreed. Jonah was the newest, and because he was newest, we all watched him without meaning to. Elena was the reason camp felt human after dark. She carried cardamom coffee in a steel flask and left handwritten notes in dry bags so nobody missed a battery check or water break. We were there because 5 disappearances, spread across 9 years, had clustered around the same drainages south of the Clear Springs Loop, and every case file contained one detail that should not have repeated. Clothing found arranged, not discarded. Our base camp sat in a narrow hardwood pocket 17 miles from the nearest staffed station in Meadville, and almost 11 miles from the closest paved road you could trust after rain. The ground there falls away in broken creek cuts, red clay shelves, and oak-choked gullies that carry sound sideways. A call from one ridge can seem to rise from behind you. Pine stands close the sky, then open without warning into low swales where water lingers under black leaf rot. It is the kind of country that looks manageable on a map and closes around you once the sun drops below the tree line. Even in daylight, the woods pressed from every side. At dusk, they felt less like scenery and more like walls. As far as the first wrong thing we found was not a track. It was silence. At 4:17 that afternoon, while Elena was setting a recorder near a game trail, the cicadas cut off as if somebody had shut a door. No birds moved. No squirrels scratched bark. Claire looked up before I did. She had that look officers get when a room changes before anybody speaks. 10 minutes later, Jonah called us to a wash near an old fire ring. In the mud were deer prints, raccoon prints, our own boot marks, and one line of human impressions that ended in the middle of open ground. Left, right, left, then nothing. No drag, no pivot, no stumble. Beside the ring, under a sheet of wet leaves, we found a child-sized denim jacket folded into a square and laid on a flat stone. The missing girl tied to that case had vanished in 2011. Her father swore she had worn that jacket into camp. The sheriff wrote that he had probably misremembered. That night, the recorders picked up voices shaped like voices, but wrong in the spaces between breaths. Elena played one back for us through headphones. It sounded like a woman saying Claire's name from very far away, then much closer on the second repetition, though the waveform showed no footfall, no brush contact, no approach. Claire checked the perimeter, counted us, and told Jonah to stay within the firelight. He nodded. 15 minutes later, he was standing at the edge of camp with his flashlight hanging loose in his hand. He said he had heard his mother calling from down the gully. His mother had been dead for 8 years. When Claire asked how long he had been gone, he told us maybe 30 seconds. Elena held up her camera screen. It showed 4 minutes and 19 seconds of empty firelight, with Jonah absent from frame. He had no mud on his boots, no leaves on his cuffs, only a pale half-moon mark at the center of his chest, as if someone had pressed a cold thumb through his shirt and against the bone. We broke camp at first light and followed the old survey line south, because Claire did not want another dark hour spent in that basin. Half a mile out, Jonah found fresh tracks beside ours. 4 impressions, longer than a man's foot, deep at heel, deeper at toe, as if whatever made them had paused and leaned forward before moving. They crossed our trail, entered a patch of broom sedge, and ended there. Elena filmed the ground while I marked bearings. In playback, a shape crossed behind Claire at the edge of the frame, not tall enough to blot 2 saplings at once, but it never appeared in front of the lens. At noon, we reached the remains of a line shack from the timber days. Inside a rusted locker, I found an oilskin packet containing a ranger note dated July 14th, 1974. It described a hunter recovered alive, boots folded together outside his tent. Pulse normal, pupils fixed, then dead of heart failure before sunrise. Same drainage, same silence before contact, same official wording afterward. We should have left then. Claire said we would. The problem was Elena's recorder. She had mounted one high in a sweet gum near the first camp, and on the return to retrieve it, the woods went mute again. Not quieter, mute. Even the wind seemed to stop halfway through the leaves. Then we heard Jonah yelling from our right. Claire ran toward his voice. Elena grabbed my sleeve and pointed left. Jonah was standing there too, 20 yards away, frozen, his face white in the tree line. The voice to our right kept calling Claire by rank, using words Jonah never would have known. That was when I understood it was splitting us on purpose. Claire understood a beat later. She turned back, reached for Jonah, and the brush behind him opened without sound. He did not scream. 1 second he was in front of us. The next there was only his pack on the ground and his boots set neatly side by side in black mud. We ran for the line shack because it had walls, a steel door, and exactly 2 bars of signal if you stood on the north step with your arm raised. Elena got 1 call through to dispatch. I heard her say 3 words clearly. Missing person, immediate response. And then the phone died at 91% battery. My GPS screen went blank at the same moment. Claire loaded the 12 gauge from the truck rack and counted what we had left. 7 shells, 1 flare pistol, 2 headlamps, half a tank of gas. It circled outside until full dark. We never saw all of it. We saw height beside the rain barrel. We saw a hand with too many joints rest on the window screen and leave no pressure in the wire. We heard breath from the roof, though the metal never bowed. At 11:43, the shack door shivered once. At 11:44, something tapped Elena's voice against the back's wall and asked to be let in. Claire fired through the panel. The blast lit bark, knees, and a face that looked less seen than remembered, as if the forest had borrowed parts of several things and worn them badly. I had crossed 30 feet between shots without entering the beam. Claire pushed us through the rear hatch and told us to run the creek. Claire stayed behind to slow it. She had 17 years in uniform and the kind of voice that made panic take one step back. I heard the second shotgun blast after Elena and I slid into the creek bed. I never heard a third. We found Claire 80 yards downstream at dawn, seated upright against a tupelo, eyes open, skin unmarked, except for a dark print over her sternum. 5 long impressions like a hand that had closed and then withdrawn. The medical examiner later told me her heart tissue looked as if it had failed under extreme age, not force. Claire had run 6 miles 3 weeks earlier at a charity event and beaten officers 10 years younger. Elena and I kept moving until the creek widened into a gravel bar. That was where it chose her. Not by speed, by patience. My grandmother had once told me that if the old thing in the timber calls a name, you do not answer, and you never follow the voice into open ground. Elena heard her brother crying from the far bank. She took 1 step out of the water before I caught her hand. She told me she could see him. There was nobody there. The air smelled like wet pennies. Every frog went quiet. Elena took her notebook from her vest, shoved it at me, and said if I heard my own name, I was to bite my tongue and look at the current, not the trees. Then something moved along the bank without bending grass, and she tore free from me on purpose, drawing it after her. I saw shoulders. I saw a stride longer than any man's. I saw her headlamp spin into the dark. I never saw her land. The report filed that week said Jonah likely wandered during acute stress. Claire died during pursuit from an undiagnosed cardiac condition, and Elena was presumed drowned after disorientation. That report was wrong in ways paper can prove. Jonah's boots were photographed upright with clean insoles. Claire's autopsy listed no coronary disease, no drugs, no stroke. Elena's notebook, the one she forced into my hand, contained 6 dates going back to 1830, each tied to Homochitto, each followed by the same phrase in different handwriting. Silence first, then calling. 2 of the earlier survivors died years later in their kitchens of unexplained heart failure. I took the notebook to an elder in Neshoba County. He read 1 line, closed it, and told me the old people called it Homochitto, the great black being, though his grandfather used another translation in private, the taker of standing breath. He said our people already knew its trails. Homochitto National Forest is still open today. Families fish at clear springs, ride the trails, and leave with stories about deer and water. Most visitors have a normal, pleasant experience. But on windless nights after rain, when ground fog settles in the creek bottoms and something uses your name from beyond the trees, you leave. Nobody connects the cases. I survived because I kept my eyes on the current and never answered. That is the part that keeps me awake at night.